A 21-year-old shows up to Trump's private Florida estate at 1:30 in the morning armed with a shotgun and a gas canister. A former reality TV star who once sang on national television about how much he loved his wife now sitting in a jail cell charged with her murder. And a Utah mother who wrote a children's book about grief after her husband died, now on trial, accused of being the one who killed him with a lethal dose of fentanyl. 3 stories, 3 crimes, 3 cases so disturbing, so shocking, and so deeply human that the entire country cannot look away. Welcome back. Today we are breaking down the most talked about crime stories dominating the United States in the last 48 hours. These are not cold cases, not things that happened months ago. These are unfolding right now, this weekend and this morning, and the details are more jaw-dropping than any scriptwriter could invent. This report is based on publicly available information from reputable news outlets as of Monday, the 23rd of February 2026. Some details may change as new facts emerge, and it is important to remember that all individuals accused of crimes are presumed innocent until proven guilty. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you are going to understand exactly what happened, why it matters, and what comes next. Let's start at Mar-a-Lago. It was 1:30 in the morning on Sunday, February the 22nd, when security systems at Mar-a-Lago, President Donald Trump's private estate in Palm Beach, Florida, registered something alarming. An individual had penetrated the inner perimeter of the property. According to the United States Secret Service, agents and a Palm Beach County Sheriff's deputy moved quickly to confront the intruder. What they found was a young white male in his early 20s, carrying 2 items, what appeared to be a shotgun and a fuel can. Palm Beach County Sheriff Rick Bradshaw described what happened next in a press conference on Sunday morning. The suspect was ordered to drop the items. According to Sheriff Bradshaw, the man put down the gas canister but then raised the shotgun into a shooting position. At that moment, law enforcement fired. The young man was pronounced dead at the scene. By Sunday afternoon, federal authorities had identified him as Austin Tucker Martin, 21 years old, from Cameron, North Carolina. Investigators believe he had driven approximately 700 miles south from his home state, acquired a shotgun along the way, and arrived at the gates of the most protected private residence in the country armed and prepared for something. Exactly what his intentions were remains a subject of active federal investigation. According to the Associated Press, the FBI was seen at Martin's family home in Cameron, North Carolina, on Sunday afternoon. President Donald Trump was not at Mar-a-Lago at the time of the incident. He was in Washington, D.C. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt addressed the incident publicly, saying the Secret Service had acted quickly and decisively to neutralize a threat, describing the suspect as a person who had intruded on the president's home while armed with a weapon and a gas container. She also used the statement to criticize political opponents, a move that itself drew reaction from across the political spectrum. What makes this story all the more extraordinary is what investigators and journalists began discovering about Austin Tucker Martin within hours of his death. He had actually been reported missing by his own family just before the shooting. According to the Moore County Sheriff's Office in North Carolina, at approximately 1:40 in the morning on Sunday, one of Martin's relatives approached a deputy at a local business and filed a missing persons report. Minutes later, he was dead 700 miles away at the gates of Mar-a-Lago. That missing persons case was subsequently handed over to federal investigators. The entire sequence of events, the drive through the night, the weapons, the gas can, the breach at one of the most heavily guarded properties in the United States, left law enforcement, journalists, and especially Martin's own family in complete shock. To understand just how bewildering this case is, you have to understand who Austin Tucker Martin was, or at least who the people who knew him say he was. His cousin, 19-year-old Braden Fields, spoke to the Associated Press on Sunday and described Martin as a gentle, generous, quiet young man who was genuinely afraid of guns. Fields said the two grew up together and that Martin would donate money he earned from his job as a groundskeeper at a local golf course directly to charity. He liked to sketch. He had actually started his own small business in 2025 called Fresh Sky Illustrations, focused on watercolor and ink artwork of golf courses. He was a 2023 graduate of Union Pines High School in Moore County. Fields told reporters that Martin had not even been comfortable around firearms. He said, and these are his words, that Martin had tried shooting a BB gun with family but would not touch real weapons. And then there is the question of politics. Braden Fields was emphatic. The Martin family are, in his words, big Trump supporters. All of them. When asked about his cousin's potential motives, Fields said Martin never talked about politics, never went out of his way to pick arguments, and that his willingness to breach a presidential property made no sense to anyone who knew him. Reporting from the Daily Beast, citing people who knew Martin, added a layer of complexity. According to that outlet, people close to Martin described him as increasingly troubled in the period before the incident, fixated on what he perceived as a government cover-up related to the Jeffrey Epstein files. The Department of Justice had released millions of Epstein-related documents in January, and Martin, according to those sources, had been vocal about his frustration that powerful people he believed were named in those files were not being held accountable. He was described as outspoken about his Christian faith and growing more economically frustrated, still living with his parents and feeling, as many young Americans do, that the cost of independent living had become out of reach. His JROTC officer from high school, Clarice Bonillo, told the New York Times that Martin came from a very pro-Trump family and fit into that narrative, but that he would not go out of his way to attack anyone from the political left. He kept his opinions mostly to himself. None of this, not the politics, not the frustration, not the Epstein fixation, explains a 700-mile midnight drive with a shotgun and a fuel can to the president's private estate. Investigators are now working to piece together a psychological and behavioral timeline. When did something shift for this young man? What was driving him? And did anyone around him see warning signs in the days before he disappeared? The case also raises broader questions about security. Mar-a-Lago has a documented history of perimeter breaches, and this incident, given the armaments carried and the fuel can, is being treated with particular gravity. The investigation is ongoing, involving the Secret Service, the FBI, and local law enforcement. The reaction to the Mar-a-Lago shooting has been as layered and complicated as the story itself. On one side, law enforcement officials and the White House were firm and unified. The Secret Service acted correctly. A man approached the perimeter of a presidential residence armed with a shotgun and what could have been an accelerant for fire, refused lawful commands to stand down, and raised his weapon. The response was by the book. Sheriff Rick Bradshaw of Palm Beach County was measured but clear in his press conference, describing the sequence of events in clinical terms and praising the response of his deputies and the Secret Service. From a law enforcement standpoint, there is little ambiguity in what happened operationally. But online and in the communities that knew Martin, the reaction has been far more anguished. His cousin Braden Fields described already seeing people online attacking his cousin's character hours after his death, before any motive had been established. Martin's mother, Fields said, is torn apart. The family has been simultaneously dealing with grief, with federal investigators at their property, and with public attention they never anticipated. Among security analysts and former law enforcement officials interviewed by national media outlets, the focus has been on what the incident reveals about lone actor security threats. The combination of a firearm and a fuel canister is a particularly alarming pairing, suggesting a potential intent not just for a confrontation but for destruction. The fact that this came from a young man who, by all accounts from family, was not politically violent and who was actually a supporter of the president underscores what experts have long warned, that ideologically motivated lone actors do not fit neat profiles. Political reactions have also been swift. White House Press Secretary Leavitt's statement, which linked the breach to political opponents, was criticized by some as using a security incident for partisan purposes before investigators had even determined a motive. Democrats pushed back, calling the framing inappropriate. Administration supporters countered that the shutdown of certain government departments, a reference to ongoing congressional funding disputes, had created staffing pressures on federal security infrastructure. This is a case that cuts across every neat narrative. A pro-Trump young man from a pro-Trump family approaching Trump's residence armed and at midnight. The human story at its core of a 21-year-old who by all indications was struggling, frustrated, and evidently in some kind of crisis has prompted reflection among commentators about mental health, economic despair among young men, and the dangerous rabbit holes that online information ecosystems can create. The immediate implications of the Mar-a-Lago shooting are being felt across multiple areas simultaneously. For the Secret Service, this incident will trigger a detailed after-action review. While the agents performed their immediate duties under protocol, The question being asked by security professionals is why an individual was able to get deep enough into the inner perimeter to require lethal force. Prior breaches at Mar-a-Lago, which has a dual function as both a presidential residence and a private club, have exposed the complexities of securing a property that is not purpose-built as a government facility. Each breach informs the next security upgrade, but it also raises questions about whether the site's fundamental structure is compatible with the protection requirements of a sitting president. Longer term, this incident will likely intensify conversations in Washington about funding for federal security agencies. The DHS budget standoff, already a point of significant political contention, will now have a visceral, real-world reference point. Administration allies will argue that fully funded, fully staffed security infrastructure is a matter of life and death. Critics will counter that the response at Mar-a-Lago was appropriate and that the political framing of the incident has been exploited. For the country more broadly, the story of Austin Tucker Martin raises uncomfortable questions. He was 21 years old. He was employed. He was reportedly a charitable person. He was engaged in creative pursuits. Something happened internally, psychologically, that set him on a 700-mile drive to the gates of a presidential estate at 1 a.m. with a shotgun. The full forensic picture of what he was thinking, what he planned, and what he had communicated in the days before will emerge slowly through the federal investigation. When it does, it will likely illuminate a set of warning signs that went unaddressed, and that, for many families watching this story, will be the most important question of all. At approximately 2:30 in the morning on Monday, February 16th, Tip City Police in Ohio received a frantic 911 call. A man was on the line, his voice urgent and panicked, telling a dispatcher that someone had broken into his home and killed his wife. He said she had been shot multiple times in the head and that he did not know whether the intruder was still in the house. Officers arrived at the home on Cunningham Court and found the woman, 37-year-old Ashley Flynn, dead inside. Her husband, 39-year-old Caleb Flynn, was in the home, along with their 2 children. What followed was a 9-day investigation that ended on Thursday, February 19th, with Caleb Flynn being arrested at his own home and booked into the Miami County Jail. The following day, he appeared by video before Judge Samuel Huffman and entered a plea of not guilty to charges of murder, 2 counts of felonious assault, and 2 counts of tampering with evidence. Judge Huffman set his bond at $2 million. Flynn addressed the court briefly. His words, heard through the video feed, were, "I just want to take care of my daughters. I'm not a risk." According to court documents and a statement from Tip City Police Chief Greg Adkins, investigators determined that the crime scene had been manipulated, staged, in their assessment to mislead authorities about what had actually occurred. The 911 call, the signs of what appeared to be a break-in, the framing of a mysterious intruder. Prosecutors allege none of it was real. According to the criminal complaint filed in Miami County Municipal Court, Ashley Flynn was killed with a 9mm handgun. Caleb Flynn is not just any defendant. In 2013, he appeared on Season 12 of American Idol, describing himself during a YouTube interview posted by the show as a music pastor. In that same interview, speaking about his wife Ashley, he said, and this is a direct quote from that public recording, "I absolutely love the Lord, and I love my wife more than anything. She is very, very pretty. I love her." That clip, which is still accessible online, has now circulated millions of times since his arrest, its warmth made unbearable by what prosecutors allege happened inside that Tip City home 13 years later. Ashley Flynn was, by every account available, a beloved figure in the Tip City community. Her obituary described her as a passionate church volunteer, a substitute teacher for Tip City schools, and the 7th grade girls volleyball coach, a woman woven into the fabric of her local community, committed to her children and her faith. The couple had 2 young daughters who were home asleep at the time of the shooting and were not harmed. Caleb Flynn's professional life after his brief appearance on American Idol had moved away from music and into the commercial world. His LinkedIn profile listed him as a vice president of sales at a Tip City-based commercial flooring company. He continued to identify himself publicly as a person of faith. The community around Tip City, a small city of roughly 10,000 people located about 20 miles north of Dayton, was unprepared for what emerged. The staged crime scene allegation is the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Prosecutors allege that Caleb Flynn shot his wife, then deliberately arranged evidence to make it appear that an intruder had committed the killing before placing the 911 call. Police Chief Adkins, in his statement, said that, as a result of the investigation, probable cause existed to charge Caleb Flynn with the murder of his wife. Due to the ongoing nature of the case, specific investigative details were not released at the time of writing. Flynn's attorney, whose name has been reported by outlets including NBC News, issued a statement expressing disappointment at what the defense characterized as a short timeline and a seeming rush to judgment. The attorney said Flynn looks forward to defending himself against the allegations. His next court date, a preliminary hearing, is scheduled for Thursday, February 26th. The case has also reopened a broader conversation about domestic violence in the United States. According to data from the city's reporting on New York crime statistics published this same weekend, 39% of felony assaults in New York City in 2025 were classified as domestic violence incidents. Nationally, domestic violence remains a persistent and often underreported driver of violent crime, one that, as experts note, frequently occurs behind closed doors and is resistant to traditional street-level policing responses. The Flynn case is particularly striking in its combination of public persona and alleged private violence. The American Idol footage in which Flynn described himself as a music pastor devoted to God and his wife makes the contrast with his present situation almost impossible to process emotionally. It is a reminder of how completely private lives can diverge from public presentation, and of how little communities, neighbors, and even church congregations may know about what happens inside a family home. The legal landscape in this case is still very much in its early stages, and it is critical to stress what has been established in court so far. Caleb Flynn has pleaded not guilty. The charges against him are serious, but they are allegations at this stage, and the judicial process has only just begun. For the prosecution, the core argument is built around the staged crime scene. If investigators can demonstrate conclusively that the physical evidence was manipulated, that the signs of forced entry, the positioning of evidence, the framing of an intruder were deliberate fabrications, then the entire foundation of Flynn's 911 call collapses. That is a significant burden of proof, and forensic analysis of the scene will be central to whether prosecutors can meet it. For the defense, the strategy, at least publicly, appears to be one of patience and skepticism about the investigation's pace. The attorney's statement about a rush to judgment signals an intention to challenge the timeline of the investigation and possibly the integrity of specific forensic conclusions. Defense teams in stage scene cases often focus on alternative explanations for physical evidence, on the reliability of forensic investigators, and on reasonable doubt. The broader community of Tip City is navigating something genuinely painful. Ashley Flynn was embedded in that community as a teacher, a coach, and a church volunteer. Her death is a loss that was already deeply felt before the arrest of her husband made it something altogether different and more complicated. The two daughters at the center of this case, whose lives have been upended, will remain a source of concern as the legal process unfolds. For those following true crime cases nationally, the Flynn arrest has activated the enormous and highly engaged online community that follows such stories. The American Idol connection, while relatively minor in terms of his actual career, has given the story an emotional hook that has driven it into mainstream consciousness far beyond what a local Ohio homicide case would normally reach. The contrast between the man singing on a national stage about his love for his wife and the man now sitting in a jail cell charged with her murder has been the dominant frame through which millions of people have encountered this story. This morning, in a Summit County courtroom in Utah, one of the most riveting and disturbing murder trials in recent American memory officially got underway. Curry Richens, 35 years old, a mother of three from just outside Park City, Utah, sat before a jury as opening statements in her aggravated murder trial began. She has been in jail for nearly 3 years. The charges against her include aggravated murder, attempted criminal homicide, insurance fraud, and forgery. She has pleaded not guilty to all of them. The case, which first drew national attention when Richens published a children's book titled Are You With Me? About coping with grief, approximately a year after her husband Eric Richens died, has become a landmark in how true crime stories intersect with the contemporary media landscape. Richens appeared on NBC's Stateline, where she proclaimed her innocence. The book, the television appearance, the grieving mother narrative, all of it began to unravel in May of 2023 when she was arrested and formally charged with killing Eric. In opening statements today, Chief Prosecutor Brad Bloodworth of the Summit County Attorney's Office told the jury directly, "The evidence will prove that Curry Richens murdered Eric for his money and to get a fresh start at life. He said Richens had significant debts at the time of Eric's death, that Eric's estate was valued at approximately $4 million, and that she believed she would inherit all of it. Bloodworth described the prosecution's theory in stark terms. She needed Eric Richens' money to have her fresh start at life. The defense, led by attorney Catherine Nestor, opened by playing the 911 call Richens made on the night she says she found her husband unresponsive. Nestor pointed to the emotion in that call as evidence of genuine grief. She argued that in the 4 years since Eric's death, despite exhaustive investigation, there is zero physical evidence of how the fentanyl that killed Eric got inside him. The defense is expected to challenge the credibility of the prosecution's key witness, the Richens family housekeeper, who has been granted immunity in exchange for her testimony. Eric Richens, 39 years old, was found dead in the couple's bedroom on March 4, 2022, with approximately 5 times the lethal dosage of fentanyl in his system, according to charging documents. To understand this trial, you have to go back to February 14, 2022, Valentine's Day. According to prosecutors and court documents, that was the first alleged attempt on Eric Richens' life. Corey Richens had reportedly obtained fentanyl pills from the family's housekeeper, Carmen Lauber, who has told investigators she purchased the drugs from a dealer and provided them to Richens. On Valentine's Day, prosecutors allege Richens left her husband a sandwich and a note before leaving to meet up with someone she was romantically involved with. Later that day, Eric told 2 friends separately that he felt like he was going to die. He broke out in hives, used his son's EpiPen, took allergy medication. According to one friend, Eric Richens said, "I think my wife is trying to poison me." He told another that he believed he had been poisoned through the sandwich. He did not go to a doctor. He did not leave the marriage. Court documents indicate that Eric, though he consulted a divorce attorney and an estate planning lawyer in 2020, continued to stay in the relationship for the sake of the children. Without his wife's knowledge, he had changed his will, placed his estate under the control of his sister through a living trust, and transferred his business partnership interest out of marital exposure. He was, it appears, a man who feared his wife but was not yet willing or able to fully break free. In late February 2022, prosecutors allege that Richens asked the housekeeper for more fentanyl, saying the previous supply was not strong enough. According to investigators, the housekeeper purchased more pills from a dealer on February 26. Phone records allegedly show contact between Richens and the housekeeper around the time of that transaction. Within days, Eric Richens was dead. After his death, Corey Richens moved quickly. She published the grief book. She gave media interviews. She maintained the public posture of a grieving widow. But according to prosecutors, her internet search history in the aftermath of Eric's death told a different story. Searches about women's prisons in Utah, about life insurance payments, and about how police recovered deleted cell phone data. Defense attorneys have argued those searches were a response to the investigation, not evidence of guilt. Carmen Lauber, the housekeeper who allegedly purchased the fentanyl, has been granted immunity and is expected to be a central witness for the prosecution. The defense has signaled it will aggressively challenge her credibility, arguing that her account has changed over time and that she has a powerful legal incentive to tailor her testimony. The trial is expected to run for approximately 5 weeks through late March. The Corey Richens trial is operating on several levels simultaneously: legal, cultural, and deeply personal, and the perspectives it has generated reflect that complexity. From the prosecution's standpoint, this is a case about financial motive, premeditation, and the clinical use of a deadly drug to commit murder. The fentanyl in the system evidence, the alleged procurement of the drug, the timing of the Valentine's Day poisoning attempt, and then the fatal dose. Prosecutors are constructing a narrative of calculated, cold-blooded killing. The insurance policies, the debt, the $4 million estate, these, for the prosecution, explain everything. From the defense's standpoint, the entire case depends on the testimony of a woman who was granted immunity. Without Lauber's account, prosecutors struggle to connect Richens to the fentanyl in any direct physical way. Defense attorney Catherine Nestor's opening, pointing to the emotional 911 call, noting that the couple's drinks were never forensically tested, highlighting the old empty pill bottle found near the body, is designed to plant reasonable doubt at the very first opportunity. Among legal analysts commenting publicly on the case, the housekeeper's testimony is almost universally identified as the trial's pivot point. If the jury believes Lauber, Richens faces life in prison without the possibility of parole, the mandatory sentence upon an aggravated murder conviction in Utah. If the jury finds Lauber's account unreliable or insufficiently corroborated, the prosecution's entire theory of the case becomes difficult to sustain. The cultural dimension dimensions of this case are significant as well. The children's book titled Are You With Me has become an almost impossible to process symbol of the alleged deception at the heart of the prosecution's case. The idea that a woman allegedly poisoned her husband with fentanyl, then wrote and published a book for children about processing grief, then went on national television to proclaim her innocence. It is a narrative that challenges the most basic assumptions people make about the people in their lives. The broader implications reach into how the United States handles the intersection of domestic poisoning cases, fentanyl proliferation, and the gap between public persona and private reality. Fentanyl, which now appears not just as a street drug crisis but as an alleged murder weapon in this case, sits at the center of the nation's drug policy conversation. The Richens case is a stark illustration of how the availability of synthetic opioids creates risks that law enforcement and prosecutors are still learning to navigate. In the Mar-a-Lago case, the FBI and Secret Service investigation into Austin Tucker Martin is ongoing. Over the coming days, investigators are expected to release more information about his movements in the days before the incident, where he went, who he communicated with, and what his internet activity revealed about his state of mind. The broader security review of Mar-a-Lago protocols will also proceed, though it will not likely be made public in detail. The key questions that remain unanswered: what were his precise intentions? Was anyone else aware of his plans? And did the mental health system have any opportunity to intervene? In the Caleb Flynn case, the next major court date is Thursday, February 26th, when a preliminary hearing is scheduled. At that hearing, prosecutors will need to present enough evidence to convince the judge that the case should proceed to trial. The central forensic evidence, whatever investigators found at the Tip City crime scene that led them to conclude it had been staged, will begin to be tested in that legal arena. The defense has already signaled an intent to challenge the pace and quality of the investigation. This case will unfold over months and will draw sustained national media attention, given the American Idol connection and the deeply emotional nature of the allegations. In the Corey Richens trial, the coming days will see the prosecution begin calling its witnesses. Carmen Lauber, the housekeeper whose testimony is the prosecution's most critical piece, is expected to take the stand in the coming weeks. Before that, forensic experts will likely be called to walk the jury through the cause of death findings, the toxicology reports, and the fentanyl concentration found in Eric Richens' system. The defense will have the opportunity to cross-examine each witness and to lay the groundwork for its argument that the evidence does not add up to premeditated murder. This is a 5-week trial, expected to dominate national true crime coverage through late March. These 3 stories, the midnight breach at Mar-a-Lago, the staged crime scene in Ohio, and the fentanyl murder trial in Utah, each tell us something different about American life in 2026. The first is a story about a young man in crisis, about security and vulnerability at the highest levels of government, and about the distance between a public face and a private collapse. The second is about a marriage, a voice once lifted in love on national television, and the darkest possible accusation a spouse can face. The third is about money, grief turned into performance, and a judicial process that 4 years later is finally forcing its confrontation with the truth, or at least with the most credible version of it available. All 3 remind us that crime does not happen in the abstract. It happens to real people, in real homes, on real Sunday mornings. And all 3 remind us that understanding crime means sitting with complexity with the cousin who cannot believe his gentle, gun-shy relative drove 700 miles into a crisis, with the daughters who woke up the morning after their mother died, with their father still in the house, with the 3 boys whose mother is now on trial for the death of their father. If you found this coverage valuable, hit the like button and subscribe so you do not miss the next update on any of these cases. We will be following all 3.